nothing ever hurts.
Oh, I wanted to pull myself up for a sec and wave and say hello to everybody. And we're here talking about how we're working differently. I'm working differently. I'm on Starlink internet and I'm in the middle of nowhere at a cottage that desperately needs to turn into a rental business really fast. So once I get the website up, I'm going to be sharing it with all of you, and feel free to rent it. But, so nice to be here with everybody.
Dave, you started with the pitch at the beginning. Normally people pitch at the end of an event.
That's Desi, that's the whole point. Like, Dave just can't stop selling. It's crazy. And his hair don't care either.
Oh man. Well, I have no space anymore. I've just sort of thrown the towel in on that one. So I'm going for Airbnb rentals.
Awesome.
Can't beat them, join them.
That's it.
And there's our man John. This is a real background, believe it or not. It's crazy. And I've been watching Bad Sisters lately, and like that confirmed for me for sure that it is real.
That's
because you'll see the dog move. You'll see the dog move there in a second. He's just there beside me.
John, I just put a picture of my dog up too, because Dave, you made fun of Dave's hair on that LinkedIn post. So I introduced you to Murphy. My dog has a mohawk, so you'll have to check that out.
Ooh, Annie's got a nice little background too. Love it, Annie. Beautiful.
But now I can't see you guys.
Yeah. Well, okay, so John and Annie and JJ, totally your call on keeping cameras up the whole time. But what we have heard from audience members is that sometimes it's easier for them to stay dialed into the chat if they don't have to look up and also at you guys and the group. But it's also your call from a comfort level perspective.
Yeah, it's totally. That's one thing. I'll just go ahead and like sort of soft start while people roll in. One of the things that we've been learning, this new modality, right? If you want to get up and walk around. If you want to sit. No one really cares. It's like you're not really actually in front of, unless you're face to face with an avatar, like or inappropriate with an avatar, like Dave was with Tracy Hawkins in the first week. He was inappropriately close to her, avatar to avatar. It's really like there's thousands of miles between us. So feel free to just kind of get up and dance and move if you want to. But you see the perspective that you have when you're moving your head around. That's people's view of the room. So, well, welcome. This is number 10, right, Dave?
Number 10.
Yeah, number 10. So it's pretty awesome. Looks like we've got 44 users in world, 26 users in here coming in, which is great so far. Thanks for coming. I'm Chris Moeller with Orion Growth. This is definitely an experiment. This is a virtual co-working space in OC. We could not do this without our OC partners, so I'm not sure where everybody is, Sarah, Mike, anybody else that's in here, but please take a few minutes to get to know some of the OC folks. An amazing group of people building a community here, and they've been an amazing partner. Octosmos has been an amazing partner in helping us get people navigated and all the settings right and everything. So thanks again for coming. We will record this. John Ramser from Orion is in here somewhere. Oh, he's sitting there waving. He's at the middle table. His perspective is streaming this to YouTube. So you'll be able to come back and visit or forward and click, to anybody that you want to share it with. So with that said, thanks again for coming. It will be recorded if you want to play it back or share it with somebody else. And I'll flip it to my infamous co-host, Dave Cairns.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for coming. This is a fun group already. I'm seeing the names that are in here, so really appreciate it. So we're going to dive right in because we want to give as much time to these awesome speakers as we can. So I'm going to introduce them quickly, do my little monologue, and then we'll roll with question number 1. Okay, so starting with Annie. Annie is the global head of Team Anywhere at Atlassian, where she's responsible for the 11,000 person company's shift to distributed work. Annie oversees the real estate and workplace experience teams at and the Team Anywhere Lab, a dedicated group of behavioral scientists focused on designing and validating evidence-based ways of working. Most recently, Annie was Meta's first director of remote work, where she created and led a portfolio of future of work strategies. As a globally recognized expert on remote flexible working, Annie's work has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and as of a couple days ago, I think it was Fortune. And it just seems like, Annie, you come on LinkedIn a couple times a week and you go viral, and I'm kind of jealous about it, but I'm a huge fan. Thanks for being here. And I've got a little bit of an echo. I don't know if that's for somebody, but I'll keep going. Now we have John Riordan, who has become a really fast friend to me. John, he's, I guess the traditional way to introduce John is that he would refer to himself as the chairman of Grow Remote, having retired in 2021 as chairman of the board of Shopify International after a long career in customer service. But that's pretty boring. To those who know him, he's the legitimate godfather of remote. He first brought and implemented remote work services in 2002 before broadband was a thing. He brought Apple into the remote world arena in 2006 and was selling outsourced remote services 15 or 20 years ago when it was known as teleworking. By the way, some people are still using that term. It's weird. He has bought, sold, implemented, and advocated for this type of working arrangement in the US, Canada, the UK, Ireland, New Zealand, Philippines, Turkey, India, China, Japan, and Lithuania. Retirement has made John even more of an authentic and unfiltered voice on all things to do with remote, hybrid, and flexible distributed work. He can always be relied on to share his opinions on the future of work from his bolt hole at the beach in the glorious southwest coast of Ireland, which truly, truly doesn't even seem to be real. It's that beautiful. Welcome, John. Now we've got JJ Reeder. JJ has been building and leading teams remotely for a decade while consulting forward-thinking companies from global Fortune 500s, startups, on how to evolve practices and cultures for the asynchronous distributed future. Quoted in CNBC, Wired, Fast Company, JJ is the instructor of how to manage a remote team on Coursera with 60,000 plus learners. Guys, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to kick it off. So before COVID, the future of work was not really on the average person's radar, at least with any depth. I'm a commercial real estate agent, and it wasn't even on my radar. Every company I was interacting with wanted office space, and there was none of it, so we didn't really have to use our brains. But once we sort of settled into COVID, it quickly became a top 5 conversation, up there with climate change, the myriad of inclusion and safety issues that we face, depicted by things like George Floyd's horrific death, or J.K. Rowling's interactions with the trans community, our mental health crisis, and AI. These are really, really deep and important issues, and somehow the future of work still made that list. But what has only recently made the list is the future of how we work. And that's what we're here to talk about today with Annie, John, and JJ, the how. But before we kick off with the first question, I thought it'd be fun to show you all a famous Seinfeld clip that I think holds some weight in this discussion, so humor me for a moment. And while I think Sarah's gonna pull it up,
yep.
I will say that this innovative idea came to me while I was sitting staring out at the ocean as I was typing up the framework to this intro. But apparently, innovation is meant to happen at the water cooler and through osmosis, right? According to Annie's latest Forbes piece, not really so much. So I would say that I'm with Annie on this one, and I assume some other people are too.
Ready?
Yeah, let's throw it up.
There we go.
I'm sorry, we have no midsize available at the moment.
I don't understand. I made a reservation. Do you have my reservation?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars.
But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservations.
I know why we have reservations.
I don't think you do. If you did, I'd have a car. See, you know how to take the reservation, you just don't know how to hold the reservation. And that's really the most important part of the reservation, the holding. Anybody can just take them.
If you get to know me, you'll know I'm a massive, massive Seinfeld fan. I started watching that show way too young. The contest episode, for anyone who knows it, I definitely thought it was something other than what it actually was, but I'll leave it there. Anyway, this stuck out to me as I was writing this, because to me it felt like remote and distributed work were all of a sudden being marketed as a product by some of the largest organizations out there once the pandemic hit. We had Salesforce saying that they were going to put the who, what, and where, the who, the what, and the why before where. We had Mark Zuckerberg talking about the fact that more than 50% of his organization was going to be remote by 2030. and leaning hardcore into the metaverse. And countless employees were hired as remote workers only to have the reservation taken back from them once sort of late 2022, 2023 rolled around. So I just thought it was a kind of funny way to kind of, make an analogy. Okay, so I'm going to be bold. I believe that we have an epidemic on our hands when it comes to the future of work. And that epidemic is not understanding how to do it differently. If we don't change the how, I'm going to say the F word, I think we're fucked. And I think it's much bigger than any individual company's business performance. It's a globally significant issue that permeates all aspects of our society. So I am going to start with Annie on this first question. And here is my question. What is your take on all of this? Is this a crisis with more downstream risk than we can imagine, or am I being overly dramatic? Starting with Annie.
First order of business, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear you there, Annie. Didn't hear you there.
Yeah, I'm testing my, I switched to headphones. I just want to test to see if you guys can hear me.
That is much better, I think.
Great. So let's see, what's the stakes here? I think that innovation is something that you can't control. It's like a runaway train, and I think that in a good way. And I think that this change is permanent and will only become more permanent as we look at the watershed moment when commercial leases become due in 2030. And businesses have different options, existing leaders retire, etc. But I think it's going to be a much harder struggle if we can't pivot on how we approach this conversation. I would really like us to start telling the story about how corporate enterprises are saving a lot of money and have better unit economics and are able to run a more efficient business by utilizing a kind of location agnostic policy or a distributed policy. And I would love there to be a lot more research that stops measuring broken remote implementation models and starts measuring the real outcomes that we need to know about. So how is quality of life changes impacting creativity and innovation in a positive way? How is new connection approach it in like a offsite and team gathering? How does that positively impact productivity as opposed to the kind of sporadic office attendance that we see today with teams that truly aren't located together? So, I think it's really about getting our ducks in a row and our arguments put together in a way that is convincing to business leaders. Because right now in the conversation, it just hasn't been very nuanced or deep. And that's because we've all been responding to a crisis. But the time is now to figure out how to design these things differently and really make the business case to the world at large.
Thank you, Annie. That was a great start. I'll throw it to John next. And John, if I could also just add on, if you have any thoughts on how companies can better sort out to repurpose and downsize real estate. I mean, I know you have a lot of experience with Apple and Shopify. So as you answer, I just thought it might be cool to get a take on that.
John might be muted.
Are you
It's
muted,
a problem
John?
that persists in the metaverse. Yes, you're muted.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. Of course
There
I
you go.
was. Yeah. Great start. So I'm going to go against the grain, Dave, and I'm going to say there isn't an epidemic. Absolutely flat out, there is not an epidemic. What we're actually seeing is just a slower transition than most of us would want. If you go back, not that long ago, most of the corporate structures were hierarchical, and now they're a whole lot flatter. Work hours, even just as basic work hours, were very much fixed, and now they're a lot more flexible. Our dress codes were business, and now they're casual. Leadership styles were all command and control, and now they're a whole lot more about engagement, about empowerment, about enablement. Even technology, not long ago, most of the technology was on premises and it was proprietary technology. Now it's virtually all in the cloud and it's open sourced and shared. So to me, we are continuing to evolve. It's just that we are impatient and we are expecting a cataclysmic, massive shift in a very short period of time. We're only 3 years and 3 months into one of the most enormous changes of all. Yet the numbers are actually, the numbers of people actually move from a thought process perspective. The number of people who've moved has been pretty significant. Gallup did a poll, I think it was in about a year ago. And they asked people, and this was just looking at remote capable jobs. So that's all they were asking about. And in 2019, about 8% of people who were in remote capable jobs were actually fully remote. When they were asked in 2022, 32% of people, so 4 times, a growth of 4x, were saying that their preferred location for those jobs was fully remote. Now, on the flip side, fully office, 60% of people in 2019 in remote capable jobs were actually fully in office. When they were asked in 2022, what was their preferred location? 9%. So it went from 60 to 9 for fully office and went from 8 to 32. So there's been an enormous mind shift. And where I'm going to go against the grain on this one is that I think we're just being impatient. And I think we just need to trust the fact that all the rational companies, to Annie's point, the rational companies are going to make a decision largely based upon lease expiries. And I think that's going to be the single biggest thing going to change the nature of the conversation over the next 3 to 4 years.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for that. JJ, if you have stuff to add on this, I would love for you to just roll with it. If you want a new prompt or to start with the next question, that's also cool too. So just let me know how you're feeling.
Yeah, I've got stuff to add. Actually, and I think I'm going to align with John on this one. It's been an interesting experience for me because I was at GitLab throughout the pandemic, and that is one of the most sort of experimental, innovative, remote first workplaces. And I had this very direct experience. Yes, this stuff works. We're convinced. I see it working. I can see how it's benefiting people's lives. And I have access to a bunch of evidence that it works. But at the same time, now I'm doing this work at UpWork, which was an office-based organization. Now it's transitioning. And I'm also doing a master's in organizational psychology at Harvard. And at that same time, I'm looking at the research, right? The research in this area is convincing, but you have to look at the pace that research moves. It's very, very slow. Like the research in organizational psychology, organizational behavior basically takes a decade to kick in. And what convinces leaders that they need to make change? They need to see research. They need to see true data. They need to see actual trends that they can count on, that they can bank on. So while those of us who've been in the trenches have this direct experience, we know it works because we've seen it work, that doesn't mean that we're convincing the leaders. And I think that is going to take time.
Yeah, really, really well said on the sort of the need for data. And John, I love that you disagreed with me on that because, I think in a similarly different way, JJ's highlighting kind of the need to just sort of continue to watch this whole thing evolve. Nice dancing, John, by the way. and the data is clearly pointing in the right direction. So that was a really thoughtful answer, JJ. I appreciate that. All right, so let's move to the next question then. The thing that I keep getting the most perplexed by is how some of the largest organizations in the world can turn these cruise ships even fast enough in the medium term while we wait for this data, because I think that there's huge talent and attraction and retention risks. So I think everybody here has a really unique perspective. Annie having worked at Facebook and now working with an 11,000 person company at Atlassian, and John having been at Shopify and Apple, and JJ, you literally living and breathing the remote side of things. I would like to start it off with Annie. Given that you're helping your own organization transition, how likely or unlikely do you think it's going to be for large organizations to get on board? Or do you think it's going to be like smaller, more nimble companies that create the new path forward?
I do think that, the lease renewals will be a watershed moment where larger enterprise start to get on board in a more significant way. But I also think that the smaller companies will be the forcing mechanism to drive change forward. Atlassian is in a very unique position and takes a really different approach. So when I was at Facebook, I was often, when Mark said that 50% of the company would be remote, that meant that 50% of the company would be classified as remote. They were on a remote employment contract. They had a dedicated location that was their home office. And at Atlassian, it's a little bit more fluid. It's, everyone there isn't an office requirement if you live near an office. So it kind of avoids this two-tier system. It doesn't require us to change employment contract, at 2 times a year. You don't have to go through this, difficult approval process to become a remote employee. You just work where you want to. And I think that a lot of the organizations that are experimenting with kind of different employment types are adding a lot of friction to the process. And I would love to see things become a little bit more like Atlassian, where things are more fluid, it's more trust-based, and requires less documentation, because there just isn't enough resources at companies to really think through this in a to manage the organizational load that exists at a large enterprise. So I'm hopeful that the smaller companies will create the right playbooks, show the way, and like John said, people will vote with their feet. At the end of the day, the economy is shaped by the people who participate in it, and I think preferences have been pretty clearly stated that this is the way people want to work going forward. So I think we're all agreeing that the change is inevitable. It's just, how do the companies figure out how to do this at scale in a smart way?
Yeah, well said. I'd love to put this out to anybody, but Annie, if you have something you'd like that quick, just as a real estate broker myself, I actually am still watching companies kick the can down the road. So by example, an email just came into my inbox this morning, a company that has 63,000 square feet of office space in downtown Toronto, nowhere close to the kind of utilization to justify that amount of space. They're renewing the lease for 3.5 more years. So I guess while I believe what you're saying, I'm also somewhat questioning it, because I'm still seeing a lot of companies kick the can and keep things they don't need. So I'll move to John, but if all of you want to add something to this, I just would love to get the perspective on that too, because I don't know, I'm not seeing it as much as I'd like to.
Okay, Dave, I'll jump in there. I'll just share one of the thoughts from my time at Shopify. I remember late 2019, November 2019, so this was about 4 months before the pandemic really broke, requesting a meeting with Toby Lutke, the CEO, because I wanted to have an arm wrestle with him regarding remote work. So at the time, the company was 40% of the company worked in customer service, which I was responsible for, and the other 60% worked in other roles other than customer service. And that 60% was 100% office, pretty much 100% office based. And I was trying to extol the virtues of remote work. And I'll be very honest, he really wasn't listening. He wasn't interested. And that was just the way it was. However, where I saw the genius happen was late February 2020, when it was obvious that there was going to be a significant shutdown, there was going to be a massive change. So even before the lockdowns were announced, I noticed an incredible shift in mindset at the executive level at Shopify. And by the time the shutters went down across most of the world, the company had pivoted to being 100% remote and is still 100% remote. So I'm not giving up hope that big companies can make that change, but it's going to require real guts at a senior leadership level. It's going to require companies to do batshit crazy stuff that they're probably not willing to do. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by batshit crazy. If you're Luca Maestri, who's the CFO at Apple, imagine how difficult it's going to be to go and to announce that you're going to walk away from that unbelievable building that they built in Cupertino. It just beggars belief that they could and would do it. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about in terms of being batshit crazy. And I just don't see too many large companies. I mean, Apple's a classic example. Here's the company that produces so much of the technology that is enabling all of us to communicate so significantly remotely. Yet they're one of the first people out there banging the return to the office drum. I just don't get it. So they're two kind of diametrically opposed examples of large companies who've approached it. And I think Annie is 100% correct in saying that the small companies and the approach of the small companies is what's going to eat these large companies' lunches over the course of the next 10 years. The small companies, the fairly small companies that have grown up over the last 3 or 4 years that will be quite large companies in 10 to 15 years' time, I think are the ones who are going to be the change makers and the trendsetters far more than the Metas and the Googles and the Apples of the world. And if you go back in time, any kind of 15 to 20 year period, the change in the Fortune 100 over a 20-year period is quite astonishing. You kind of think that these companies are so big they're never going to fail, or they're so big they're never going to change. They all do. And I think what's going to happen here is that this change is going to be foisted upon these companies, and the change is going to come from within, from the employees demanding a far better work experience.
Yeah, I love all that. That was really well said. And it's just interesting to see, like, the only companies that I can even think of off the top of my head that haven't pulled back or they're doing something avant-garde are, it seems like, Atlassian with 11,000 employees, and Shopify has not said a word different than what they said at the beginning of the pandemic, whereas every other big employer has. So it's a really interesting time. JJ, what are your thoughts on all this? Anything that's coming to you right now?
Yeah, definitely a big plus one on what Annie and John said, and I think that's exactly the way to think about it. Like, if you look at Apple, right? This is they're a company that, yes, they produce technology, but they also produce hardware. It's a hardware company in a lot of ways, and so they need to have some physical presence. It's also a command and control company, right? Their security level of information is above anything else, I think, in the industry. They have zero transparency to the outside world. So how do they do that? How do they effectively work remotely? I think that's the question they're probably trying to answer right now. And I would not discount the idea that a lot of these companies are working on this problem. Most likely they're doing a ton of internal research. They're really thinking about it. They've got teams devoted to this. And the fact is they probably just haven't figured it out yet. So I think it's a matter of time before we start to see what their ideas will be. And I think that change will be coming.
Right on. Okay, well, JJ, I think I am going to start with you on this next question, but I'll turn everybody's attention to the Justin Welsh tweet that is up on the board there. I want to talk about the solopreneurship movement that's taken social media platforms by storm over the last few years. Obviously, solopreneurship has been a thing for a while. But I'd like to talk about this from the vantage point of how likely or unlikely it is to impact the broader employment market. So here's the quote from Justin. He says, the greatest risk to your, I think, and this light bulb is, greatest threat to your success is relying on someone else for it. Justin's making this statement in relation to top performers who are stuck at companies with no product market fit, poor management, and no career path. And it's encouraging these top performers to remember that there are roughly 5 billion internet connected people, and that it doesn't take many of them to start to grab a tiny sliver of the market and create a lifestyle business out of it. So my question, and again, I'll start with JJ, is how likely or unlikely is it that we'll see a material exodus of top talent from corporate jobs over the next few years? Are we moving to the world that Justin and the solopreneurs articulate, or is this simply a romantic idea? Like, in essence, what I'm asking you is to tell me what you think the employment landscape is going to look like 5 to 10 years out, and what the positive or negative implications might be.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%, we're moving toward that model. I've been able to see this directly at UpWork, and it's truly the first place where I've come face to face with this idea of truly flexible employment. And so I'll give you an example. We have a project to adopt a new tool that we're using for the whole team. And instead of assigning this project to an existing employee, what we did is we brought in an expert for a 1-year contract to do the research, make the contract happen, and implement the tool, right? I think this is a model that not only is working super well for us, but that is going to work super well for all sorts of companies. And that's something that we're definitely trying to promote. So I'm biased, but I do think it works. You know, if companies have projects, they should think about staffing that project, right? We need to start moving toward this more flexible project mentality that allows company to stay innovative, to stay ahead of the curve, to have the right people on the right thing at the right time in the right capacity, right? And so I think that going forward, the professionals who are tired of the 9-to-5, who are tired of the commute, and who really have that top level of skill are absolutely going to be those people who can book out their services to the companies who need them, who can drop in, do a project for a year, and then switch to another company and do a project for a year. It's a very, very viable model, and I think it's going to benefit all of us.
Awesome. Thank you. Annie, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more that we are going to see just thematically the empowerment of the individual and the disempowerment of concentrated sources of traditional power. So whether that's companies and governments or whatever it is, you know, we're in a moment where the paradigm is shifting, and it makes a lot of sense to me that people want to take economic prosperity into their own hands. I will say I've built a company, and it's hard, you know, it's really hard. And so being part of a place where you can, you know, have a career path and an organization that's done well is it continues to be an amazing opportunity. And so, you know, I think that changes like the movement towards viable solopreneurship only continue to empower the individuals that remain at large organizations to get a better bargaining agreement and to choose where they work and have more power to ask for what they need.
Dig it. I had another question that has come to me before we close out and go to audience participation. But John, if you have anything else to add to that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing to it as well, is that an awful lot, and I don't mean to offend anybody here, but an awful lot of the discussion is in the framework of the US and is tempered with just US thinking. And even within that, an awful lot of the talk regarding real estate is very much focused on New York and LA. So I want to just take it out a little bit wider for a second. You look at in the long term, you know, some of the long-term trends that we need to be very aware of. The US, I think the population of the US in 2017 was 325, and by the end of the century, it's estimated to go to 340. That's a very small increase. And you look at a country like Nigeria, which is estimated to go from 206 million to 791 million in the same time frame. So the US is only going up about 20 million, and Nigeria is estimated to go up by 500 million in that time frame. So what am I saying here is that over time, geography is going to become history, and we need to be aware of it. And the single biggest thing that's driving it is demographics. And the work model that we're talking about now is going to be far more viable to spread across jurisdictions than the type of command and control, office-based, location-specific type of work that we've done for the last 100 years. So the pace of change is going to be phenomenal, and it's going to be driven by from the bottom by employees demanding things, but also there's an even bigger wave, and I think that's that whole demographic wave that, you know, really comes and kind of 30, 40, 50-year cycles that may well not be seen by a lot of people. But to me, if you really look at the kind of the 50 and the cathedral thinking of the 50 to 100-year view, I see absolutely no way in which the large-scale companies are going to be able to hold on to this kind of King Canute type of approach of, you're going to do it my way or the highway. I think it's going to happen from the shop floor upwards.
That was a great add-on, and you caused me to pivot my question to close out again. So thank you for that. Traditional-minded leaders, seen many of them over the last 3 years, constantly make the reference that remote work is going to equate to offshoring of labor, which is going to have massive, massive domestic implications for Western democracies. So I'd love to just ask JJ and get a perspective from all of you on what you guys feel about that issue. What's real, what is being dramatized, and how do we deal with what John just kind of brought up, which is that the geography is ultimately becoming less relevant to the future of work?
Yeah, first of all, I'm sort of allergic to the term offshoring because it is super US centric and it does minimize the impact of democratizing access to opportunity. So just to kind of throw that out there, that's my mindset. But I do think that there are some difficult things ahead of us, right? Because so much of the model is based in the US and it's based on these very high pay rates, and pay rates change as you start hiring outside of the US. That creates tension, and it's not a tension that we have an easy answer for. In addition to that, you really have to look at the regulations around labor that are popping up in different countries around the world. Every country is taking a very different approach toward labor rights for its citizens, and that's going to affect how labor works in the very near future and probably in the longer future as well. So I think that it's absolutely right that models are going to change. Understanding how to predict that is kind of impossible at this point. I think what we can definitely say is that it will change. I think Nigeria is the perfect example of this, right? Like, it's a huge population, it's growing, it's upskilling, people are ready to work, they have tons of skills, and more people are getting the reliable access that they need to. So we're definitely going to see more and more people from Nigeria getting great jobs. What does that do? That's the question, right? We don't really know the answer, but I think that you can safely say that companies will stop being so US focused, that companies themselves will start to change their base of operation, change their identity, change the way that they work in order to appeal to talent communities. And that's something we all need to keep in mind. It's not just about the user base, not just about the clientele, but it's also about the talent that you can attract.
Super insightful. So John and Annie, I feel like this group is going to be anxious to ask you guys a lot of questions. So if you have got any hot takes, please go ahead. I'll start with Annie if you do, and then I'd love to get to the question answer period.
Great. I agree with it's super important to take a very global view, because that's what we're doing here. We're sort of like both re-globalizing and becoming more local at the same time. And that's a very cool outcome of the future of work. But I'll just talk about the US for one more moment, which is that it used to be that the concept of getting cheaper labor meant that you had to establish an office in a foreign country and, be part of something called offshoring. But now you can diversify your labor costs substantially just by working within a single country. And in the US, there's a lot of opportunity to employ people in different areas with lower cost labor, accruing a lot of value to your business with almost no additional legal or compliance or tax additional overhead. So, I know that's a US view here, but I think that there's a lot of opportunities to diversify in a very easy way.
Sweet. John, what about you? Anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a fact in here for a second. The unemployment rate in the US is 3.6% now. It's in 3.7 in Ireland, 3.7 in the UK. These are all pretty much historical lows. So why are we talking about potential challenges and issues with offshoring? And I agree, offshoring is an awful term. Offshoring, most of countries who who have taken jobs and moved them to a cheaper place have done very well in upskilling their existing workforces. And by upskilling their workforces, they've bolstered their economies, not actually reduced their economies. And I think one of the points that JJ made needs to be really drawn out is that there are countries in the world that have done extraordinarily well in the last 15 or maybe 50 years through tax arbitrage. I happen to live in one of those countries that's done very well on that front. However, I think the future is going to be on, as JJ said, the arbitrage of labor law. So countries where, from a jurisdictional perspective, it is easy to work, and it is made easy to work, and it's made easy to actually have employees in those countries. Those countries are going to gain a significant point of arbitrage over countries that are going to be stuck in the mud. So there's, to me, the most interesting thing that we're going to see over the next 10 years is how governments approach this opportunity or threat, whichever way they look at it.
Amazing. I think that was a great place to end the formal part of our conversation. Thank you guys so much for that. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now.
Wow, we covered a lot. There's been an active chat in here. And I think one of the things, we got to 60,000 feet really quickly. I know some of the members in here specifically have some interest in how work will be conducted if we have, specialized teams. And by way of history, the way I met AJ was through GitLab, learning how to manage a remote team during the pandemic, and then subsequently in a product offering that they came out with called TeamOps. So, Stephen Kirk, you asked a question specifically about how to manage specialized teams, and I wanted to see if you wanted to ask that question more directly to JJ.
Yeah, sure. So I believe this came up on one of our previous calls when we were talking about, how we're going to have to change our management culture. And, we were kind of commenting that our management culture currently isn't that great, especially here in the US. And how we go ahead and upscale that to be able to take on outcomes-based projects instead of time-based projects.
This is one of my favorite subjects. Thanks for asking. I think that this is actually the right question to be asking as well, because managing a team that's flexible and remote is not at all easy, and leaders need to be aware of that as much as line managers do. I think that one of the things that we're really working on right now in messaging this need for different practices is the concept of risk. We're thinking about, if I tell an executive to go ahead and just be transparent with the company, which is something that you have to do in remote work, that executive is going to be immediately terrified that they're going to say something that's going to blow up the entire company, right? So they're not going to want to do it. And so you have to flip that on its head and say, actually, the bigger risk is to not share important information with the people on the team, and then they make a bad decision, and then they blow up the company because you didn't tell them what they needed to know. There's a lot of that kind of change that we have to be doing. It's very detailed, it's very nuanced, and it's very difficult. We have to really look at all of the structures of management that are in place and say, where do we have to flip this? What's different? It's not enough to just say, hey, go ahead, be transparent, tell everybody everything, document all your work in public. That's nice, but people need to understand why. And I think that's the phase we're in right now. It's not so much the how, although I'm all about the how, it's the why. How do we convince people? How do we let people know that this is truly something that's a risk worth taking? Did that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up on that? Okay, I went on a little rant there. So.
No, you didn't.
I love it.
I'll just plug that a little bit more too, JJ, because it's so important. I learned so much from those two certifications, and it helps a lot with putting things into perspective. So, the work that you and Darren did there at GitLab to help with that is just such a good foundational start for people to sort of get an orientation, I think. And I know Tyler's in here too. I think he also took part in some of that stuff.
+1.
Yeah.
Chris is being very diplomatic right now. He has this picture He says this picture that says "do the work." He's just like
Yeah,
constantly
do the work.
reminding me to do the work.
It's hard because people don't want to do the work, but they support the change. So Dave's right, and I get crusty about that.
Hey, Chris, I'll come take care of the animals. You know you got me.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks. Okay, so who's next? Anybody have some questions? Let's just roundtable if anybody has anything.
I raised my hand. I wanna be called on.
Awesome, please do.
I wanted to, maybe this is too spicy for like a big public forum, but like whatever is something that you can share, Annie, of like the transition away from Meta and to Atlassian. Like, I'm curious to learn like how, taking that transition like ended up being an expression of like your own autonomy and authority over like your expression of who you are. I mean, like, I sent it to you in a private chat, but the work that you've been doing in this space, especially at the scale that you've been doing it, I'm especially grateful for. And I'm wondering if you can share something about like enterprises that are choosing to show up as explicitly distributed, explicitly flexible, and pushing the authority to work where people are working down to the individual level. Like, how did you come to be at Atlassian, I guess, is maybe a more direct question.
Thank you, Tyler, so much. And thank you to all of the people in this room who continue to advocate for this work. We're always championing each other's efforts on places like LinkedIn. So thank you all. It's great to be part of this community. When it came to making the switch to Atlassian, it was a really hard choice for me. Being at Facebook was really exciting. There's so much opportunity at that company and so many incredibly talented people, really interesting emerging technologies. I really loved being there. But when I was at Facebook, I had a team of about 5 people and 150 cross-functional partners, and I had a lot of responsibility and, not as many at Atlassian. Sorry, can you hear me?
You're in and out, but I think you're okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. At Atlassian, my role is different. So instead of having 4 direct reports or 5 direct partners, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I oversee our real estate design and development team. I oversee our workplace experience team. I oversee a research lab. I have a communications and marketing specialist, and a couple of other resources that are really transformational kind of PMO resources. And that makes it possible for me to actually effectuate the change that I think is necessary to make this type of thing work at scale. Because if you make this type of change somebody's 10% job, it's really hard to get the work done. Another big difference is that our founders at Atlassian are truly devoted to this opportunity. It's a company that was founded in Australia and continues to be. About 35 to 40% of the company is based in Australia. So we naturally have been communicating across great distances for the 20-year history of the company. And, having that type of conviction and support up to the founder level has been an extraordinary experience for me, and also just, great learning for me to be able to watch CEOs at that scale who have been in business for 20 years navigate the things that they've navigated and be able to learn from them directly has been a really exciting professional opportunity. And the last thing I'll say is that I used to, before all this, I was a corporate attorney on Wall Street, but then I founded a startup in this space, and I now have been able to build a team at Atlassian that is so great. It's like running my own company again. And just because I've been able to kind of hand select the talent and cultivate the approach, and that has been so gratifying to be able to be resourced, have an amazing team, but still get to be an entrepreneur of sorts.
Oh, thank you for that, for sure.
Really cool.
So we do have about 10 minutes left, just on a time check. Dave always gets very nervous that I forget to tell people that we're going to take a picture at the end. So I just want to slip that in real quick. Around as soon as we get to 1:30-ish, we'll just pop up, empty the room, and take pictures. And Alan, I think you have a question. Is your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. So JJ touched on it before, and I think there's been some talk in the chat about it, but I'm curious what kind of insight you might all have on the governmental thinking surrounding this right now, specifically in being a blocker to the kind of change we're talking about. So for example, I imagine each country having an interest in keeping its workforce local, because that means tax income. And similar for brick and mortar, if people leave that, it affects the taxes. So how can we incentivize governments to get on board with it? And curious your overall thoughts on the area.
Specifically too, John, do you want to start that?
Yeah, I'll take that one if you, this is a really difficult one because the countries that behave quite selfishly and pull up the ladder may get some short-term gains. But I think the countries that actually make an effort to, I wouldn't say spread the wealth, but to go for the greater commonwealth, I think are going to reap the greatest rewards. As an example, and without getting too political on it, you look at what the UK has done to themselves by that genius of a move, Brexit move 6 or 7 years ago. And I think that's something that pretty much every other country should take a look at when you go for that kind of solo run. That kind of thing, that kind of polarization, self-polarization is going to hurt. So I would think that there's going to be a whole lot more countries getting together, somewhat like the EU, and looking at visa, trying to normalize some sort of visa program that allows people to transition from one country to the other. That I think there are going to be tax treaty arrangements between countries that are going to enable travel. I mean, a classic example, 2 countries in Europe that are fairly closely aligned from a legal perspective, relatively closely aligned from a legal perspective, are Ireland and Portugal, both sort of on the periphery. And both, Portugal would be kind of the equivalent of Ireland of about 25, 30 years ago. And there seems to be a natural flow of talent between a lot of Irish people are now heading down to Portugal looking for cheaper living. Folks from Portugal are coming to Ireland and working, quote unquote, remote in Ireland to avail of better job opportunities. What would actually help both countries is almost an expansion and a greater level of cooperation between the 2 countries, so people don't necessarily have to make those moves. So I think cross-border stuff is going to be one of the most interesting frontiers over the course of the next 25 years.
That's great. Thank you. Looking through here, Alan, did you have another question, a follow-up question? Your hand's still up. Just wondering. Maybe...
Nope, just forgot to lower it. Sorry about that.
Okay. No worries. No worries. Brent Zuber, you had a question. If you want me to read it, or if you'd like to speak up.
Not sure if I'm looking at the same one because I asked several and have more, but
pick your best.
Does anyone want to extrapolate with regards to quality? And from a regional government point of view, you've got training that evolves into licensing. You think of the different professions like engineers, doctors, etc. How does that work when it's work from anywhere?
I will jump in, but I don't think I have a great answer for this. So if anyone wants to run over me, go right ahead.